begin by thanking you for allowing me to say a few words on Labor Day 2012. Let me also begin by thanking you for sending Jeanne Shaheen to Washington, D.C. Jeanne has done a great job, and I hope you will give her some company by sending your two great candidates for the U.S. House of Representatives to Washington, D.C. as well. If there is an institution in this country that needs fundamental change, it is the U.S. House of Representatives, and Annie and Carol can help us make that change. Labor Day, I think, is a day of reflection, and it is a day of thanks. Sometimes we tend to take things for granted, but I think everybody in this room knows, and Martin Luther King Jr. and others reminded us, that no change takes place without struggle. And if you think that the people who own this country are going to provide justice to working families and to our children and to our grandchildren, if we don't stand up and fight for that, you are sorely mistaken. Labor Day is a day that we remember. In our parents' lifetimes, where children worked in factories, worked in the mines, worked on the farms instead of being in school. Labor Day is a day that we remember when workers stood up for their rights, their basic rights, for dignity on the job, for decent wages, decent working conditions. They were fired arbitrarily and had no recourse. Labor Day is a day that we remember that where we now, or at least most of us, take equal pay for equal work, and that we fight against discrimination against women in all areas. Many years ago, that was not the case. People fought and struggled to make those changes. Today, we understand that there is an assault against labor and working people unprecedented in our time. The people who are trying to destroy, and I use that word advisedly, labor unions, are doing that for a simple reason. They understand that when labor unions are strong in terms of collective bargaining, when labor unions are strong in the political sector fighting for the rights of the middle class, then working people gain. And if they are greedy as they are, and they want more for themselves and less for the vast majority of the people in this country, their best action is to try to destroy labor unions, public sector unions, private sector unions. And as the governor just mentioned, that is what we are seeing in Republican state after Republican state. And their goal is simple. It is not just economic, driving wages down, it is political. Because they understand an important lesson of history, that most of the important legislation passed in this country, legislation like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and many other important pieces of legislation never would have happened if organized labor did not lead working people in this country in that direction. And so today, we must remind everybody in Washington that we are not going to sit back and watch the labor union movement of this country decimated. We are going to pass an EFCA legislation so that when workers want to join a union and exercise their constitutional right of assembly and the rights of collective bargaining, we are not The fire union organizes, if an agency gets 50% of the vote on a signed card plus one, we are going to have a union in that agency. Now, I want to say, as Kevin mentioned, I am the longest serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. And I appreciate to serve. As an independent, I sometimes look at the world a little bit differently, certainly than my Republican colleagues and occasionally than my Democratic colleagues. I want to rattle off to you what I see happening in this country today and where I think together we have got to go. First point, we are all a sports culture. We all worry about the Celtics and the Red Sox and the Patriots and everybody else. And when we talk about sports, what you always want to know is who's winning and who's losing. Let me take a moment to tell you who's winning and losing, not on the ball field, but in a more important area, that is the United States economy. Briefly stated, today, the middle class of this country is collapsing, poverty is increasing, and the gap between the people on top and everybody else is getting wider and wider and wider to an obscene and immoral degree. I want to bore you for a moment with some facts, and they're important ones. So get bored for a moment, but stay with me. When you talk about economics, what are you talking about? You're talking about who has what, who's doing well. In the United States today, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth by far. We have today one family, listen up, one family, the Walton family of Walmart fame, that owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. You got that? One family owns more than $100 billion in wealth. That's more than the bottom 40% of American families, many of whom have no wealth at all, who are in debt. Top 1% of America, top 1%, owns 41% of the wealth in America. Who wants to guess what the bottom 60% of Americans own? What's the guess? Less than 2%. Got that? Top 1% owns 41% of the wealth. The bottom 60% own less than 2%. That's wealth. In terms of income, what we earn every year, top 1% earns more income than the bottom 50%. The last study that we have seen on this subject looked at 2009 and 2010. What they found is that 93% of all new income created in that year, 93% went to the top 1%. The remaining 7% of income was shared by the bottom 99%. That's what we are looking at as a nation, and those statistics are getting worse and worse. And the question, the moral question, that we have got to ask ourselves is, how much is enough? How much do billionaires really need? If you got $50 billion today, do you really need $60 billion at the same time as we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world? How much is enough? Now that's distribution of wealth. That is, who has what, who owns what. Now there's another issue out there, and that is economic power. Because when we look at America, what we love about our country, what we love about our history is the great middle class, the democratic structure. That we're all part of this. We all have a say in the future. Let me say just a word about economic power. Today, our good friends on Wall Street, that was a joke. They are not our good friends. Today, the people on Wall Street whose greed and recklessness and and illegal behavior caused this terrible recession. These 6 largest financial institutions, led by J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and the others, 6 financial institutions have assets equivalent to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America, over $9 trillion. Got that? 6 financial institutions controlling $9 trillion. And what we are begging them to do is to start investing in the productive economy, making loans to people who want to build products or provide services and create jobs, rather than continuing to run the largest gambling casino in the history of the world. And frankly, this is just my view, I don't think we're going to grow the middle class. We're going to grow our economy unless we begin to break up these huge financial institutions. They have too much wealth. They have too much power. I talked about concentration of wealth and income, talked about concentration of power. Now I want to talk about politics for a moment. Because over 2 years ago, as many of you know, the Supreme Court of the United States rendered one of the worst decisions in the history of the United States of America. By a 5-4 vote, they said that corporations are people. We are people. Corporations are not people. As a result of that decision, which said that corporations can spend as much money as they want on the political process, often without disclosure, in secrecy, what we are now seeing is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars flooding into the political process this year alone. There is one family named the Koch brothers who have decided to spend $400 million defeating President Obama and any progressive who is standing up and fighting for working families. Sheldon Adelson, $100 million. We have documented, in fact, over 20 billionaire families are now spending at least $250,000 on this campaign, and I think that that underestimates the amount of money coming in, because a lot of it is, in fact, secret money. So what you're looking at now is folks who say, hey, I own coal companies, I own Wall Street, I own oil companies, and now for a modest investment of a few